Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Warren Finch. I'm one of the Apnic full-time trainers. In regards to this presentation, I was asked to do a talk on IPv6 deployment strategies. You may have heard of artificial intelligence, and in the news for the past 2 months, there has been a tool that has been gaining a lot of traction called ChatGPT. So what I thought I would do is do a talk about actually preparing or writing an IPv6 implementation project, but using artificial intelligence, in particular, experimenting with that ChatGPT tool. So this talk will have a focus on IPv6, but it will be using strategies to help create your deployment strategy. So with that in mind, I gave a title of Preparing for IPv6 Implementation Using Artificial Intelligence. And I'm going to start by focusing on some of those tools. So I'm going to start by looking at the Myanmar environment and how you're going with IPv6 deployment, in particular the statistics associated with that. Then I'll go straight into talking about what is ChatGPT, and then how you will use ChatGPT to write a project or how you can use it in your day-to-day working environment. When we look at IPv6, it's been around since 1995. And you can see from the uptake graph that we've got here, that it looks like early 2019 is when Myanmar started to utilize IPv6 in their networks and advertising it to the world. You can see that there's been a steep increase in the past 3 to so years. And since October 2021, there's been approximately a 30% increase. So well done on that point of view. However, there's still a lot more work to be done. We can see here that Myanmar, compared to the region, is quite good, with 58.15% for the country capability. But we want to get you to be a lot higher than that. The reason for that is that IPv6 means that you've got more address space that you can share your public resources. So to do that, you're going to have to think about your deployment of IPv6, and that's where the artificial intelligence would come in. Now, you may ask about the IPv6 statistics. How do we get these statistics? And depending on where you go, there will be different values shown. The way that Apnic actually gathers these statistics about Myanmar is that we pay for advertising, and depending on your end user behavior, it will trigger that advertising and will basically deliver a 1-by-1 invisible pixel to the end user. That end user may get it because of a DNS query, some sort of behavior that they were doing, some sort of gaming, or some sort of web-based browsing. And so it may not be as accurate as some other mechanisms for looking at the IPv6 statistics, but it gives us a bit of a snapshot in time based on that user behavior, as long as the Google ads are able to be displayed. So let's focus on how to use artificial intelligence. And in this case, I'm going to focus on ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is an open source tool that you can use today for free. I'm not sure if it's going to remain free, but at this point in time, it is still free, and it's been free since its release. So it's a natural language processing model, and it's developed by an organization called OpenAI. What it stands for, the GPT, is Generative Pre-Training Transformer, and we're currently looking at version 3 of that language model. And it uses this transformer-based neural network and it's trained on a large data set. So essentially it's looking at the data set from public sources. So Twitter, Facebook, internet in general. And that data set was based up to the end of 2021. So a lot of that information that was used for developing this model finished in December 2021. So if you go to ask this artificial intelligence any questions related to anything that happened in the year 2022, it will probably not be able to give you an answer. So just be aware of that as a limitation. So this artificial intelligence tool called ChatGPT, you can be using it for a lot more than just an IPv6 deployment project. In fact, it's not aimed at IPv6 at all. It's a general natural language text, and it can be used to create various styles and formats. And you can use it to ask questions of the engine and hopefully get some sort of natural language response. Now, some of you are used to this asking questions already. So think about your friendly neighborhood search engine. When you want to know about a website or a topic, you go to your search engine and you type in some sort of key phrase or some key word to look for information on the internet using that search engine. And depending on which search engine you use, you're going to have to change those questions around. The advantages of this ChatGPT and the learning model that it used, it returns those results in a natural language. It can also be used to generate configurations, say for if you're a Cisco person and you want to migrate to using Juniper, you can grab your existing configurations and you paste that in and ask it to generate Juniper code or vice versa. Or you can ask in general, I want to deploy IPv6 on a Cisco XR device. Can you show me how? And it will go and do that. So from a documentation and planning stages, it's going to save you time because you can ask a question and it gives you a skeleton framework that you can use to build out your proposal. And it can help you. Basically, you can ask it, what are the IPv6 best practices? You can ask about manners. What are the best practices for you deploying manners in a Cisco environment? Something like that. If we look at how to use ChatGPT, the first part is to obviously have an account. It's very easy to create an account, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. And then think about what questions or topics you're interested in. So for our example in this talk, I'm going to talk about IPv6 deployment. So once you've thought of a topic, you can go through and create a list of questions to ask. Now, depending on the response that you get from the ChatGPT, you may need to refine or rephrase the question. And based on the other responses you get, you may need to do more research and come back and reiterate those questions or ask it for more detail and so on. So I'm going to spend the rest of the time talking specifically about ChatGPT and give some working examples of asking it some questions. So to create an account on ChatGPT, you go to chat.openai.com, you go to the sign up area, you'll need an email address and you click on sign up and you type in your email address. Now it needs to be an active email. Of course, it's going to ask you to validate your email. Create a password, and from there, it's going to send you an email that you need to validate, and you go and verify your email address, and you now have an account. It will also ask for a mobile phone to also validate that you're a real person. So once you've got that, you will have an account. And this is what it will look like once you get signed into the environment. So you'll have on the basically a little environment where you can ask questions. Think of it much like if you've used Discord, where you've got a bot, you type in your question and you get a response back. So that's what you'll end up with. And it gives you some working examples, what the capabilities are, and some of the limitations. And an example here in the limitations is that it's limited to knowledge about the world and events up to 2021. So anything after that, it doesn't have information there. Since its release in November, it had an upgrade in December 15th, and it had another upgrade earlier this week on the 9th of January. So used to be able to keep your previous conversations in the left-hand side, but it's been quite popular this past couple of weeks. So for this talk, I thought of some questions already. So I thought about 10 questions. And the first one I thought we should ask it is, does it know how to deploy IPv6 in an internet service provider's environment? So let's see what the response will be for that. So I'm just going to grab the question, go in here, and I'm going to paste the question in live. You never know what happens in a live demo. I'll zoom in so you can see it's actually responding with details about that. So do you know how to deploy in IPv6? Yes, deploying in IPv6 ISP involves several steps. Now, I'm going to change this because it's a big chunk of text. And I said, can you show this in step by step? And what it does, it's basically going to break it down into the major steps. So by rephrasing the question, it lays it out in a different way. So it tells me here, step-by-step guide, what I should do when I want to create an IPv6 deployment for an ISP. And I'll just let that keep going there. And I'll go back to my presentation. So the first question was, do you know how to deploy IPv6 in ISP? And in this case here, it actually did it when I did this a couple of weeks ago, when I was writing the presentation, it already did it in a step. It said, obtain a block of IP addresses. Makes sense. So you contact your regional internet registrar. And in this case, it even mentioned Apnic. Step 2, configure your routers. Makes sense that you need to do that. Set up your customer access and test and roll it out. Now, as more and more people have asked questions over the past little while, and with the new upgrade to version 9, January 9 version, looks like it's been able to give me more detail here. It's got acquire a block of IP, upgrade network, configure routers, configure customer-facing devices, test and verify, enable the services, and then monitor and maintain. So that gives us even more detail compared to my previous questions that I asked it. Next question I asked it was, what are the necessary preparation before IPv6 implementation? And again, it's dropped it down into some of those steps that you might need to do. So assess the current state of your IPv4 infrastructure. Develop a strategy for transitioning to IPv6. Obtain your addresses and configure your routers. Enable IPv6 on your customer access devices and set up IPv6 tunneling. That is if your transit doesn't support it, obviously. And then test the IPv6 network. So if you're familiar with developing projects or working on projects in the past, it looks very similar to the stages in a project. If we look at a project lifecycle, we have the assess, the develop, design, implement, and evaluate. And if we break out those key points from the previous slide, you can see you're doing the assess, the develop, obtain, enable, and testing, that reiteration model that we've got there. So that allows us to use this tool and start building out a document. Even if you are not an English speaking person, if you know how to use or ask the questions, it will try and answer those for you. And so let's type that in there and see what answers we get with the new version that's coming out. So it does replay my question. So again, it's changed based on the answer that it gave me a little while ago. So it's saying plan and design, inventory, update policies, train staff, test and simulate. So I think this is a better answer than the previous answer, because at no point did it have that training of your staff, which would go into the design and develop stages and obviously communicate. So this is going into a little bit better from this point of view. So when we look at ISP, let's ask it a very simple question. I'm going to ask it questions about the top RFCs for IPv6 deployment. So RFC is requests for comments. So I'm just going off script because I want to demonstrate that you can also ask it about documents that are there. And I'll show you that in my next slide. I already know about RFC 738, and it tells me in this case here, in this example, that RFC 7381 is a set of requirements for internet service providers that are transiting to IPv6. And it apparently is titled IPv6 Provider Assigned IPv6 Unicast Addresses. Now, if we go back to our ChatGPT, where it's still listing RFCs out, we can see here that it's giving a list of 4291, 1981, 486, and so on. It hasn't mentioned that RFC. So I will type it in anyway, RFC 7381. So can you tell me about RFC 7381? And now it's going to give me more detail. And in this case here, it's telling me about describes a method for IPv6 prefix delegation in DHCP. So it's given me a different name again. Whereas previously, it gave me a different name here of IPv6 provider assigned addresses. Now, this is something I do want to point out. The machine code or the modeling can have some errors. So if we actually went to the correct RFC, in this case here, just going to change it over to this RFC, you can see that it's actually called Enterprise IPv6 Deployment Guidelines. So it's made a mistake. So you also need to make sure you do further research. And that's what I said in there. And you can tell it that it's wrong. Now it's gone and tried a different one. So it seems like this model is actually quite broken with the new update, whereas it did fix it in when I was writing the presentation. So just be aware of that. It can help you, but it can make mistakes. So make sure you are aware of that. A big hint for the Zoom, the Kahoot quiz, I'm probably going to ask you about this title here. So you might need to know which RFC for that. So when we look at our ChatGPT, we can also start drilling down and getting definitions. So if you're not sure about something and you just need some help with some code, you can get it to help you with that. So for example, in IPv6, we want to look at happy eyeballs, which is the details that you need to focus on to make sure that your customer are happy. So if I do can you write code for the happy eyeballs in Bash, it's going to basically build up the script for me. Now, for those people who don't know what happy eyeballs are, I'll let that run in the background. It's basically looking at the devices and how they connect to the internet. So it tries to determine the IPv6 address and connect to the internet device via IPv6 first. If it can't, it will then fail back to IPv4. And that's essentially what we're doing there. So what I did is I just asked the ChatGPT to help me write a test script to test connections to the internet. So I then know if my IPv6 is working correctly. And so what it does here, it's done a example in Bash for me. It's got the host being example.com, what port to try, timeout, and it's got this very complex way of doing it. So attempt to connect to host using IPv6, and it does all the commentary for you there as well. So you can try and copy and paste that. If you don't understand anything in this, copy the code and you can say, what does this line of code do? And it will hopefully break it down into more steps for you. So if you're new to scripting, it's a great tool for you to have a look at. If you're more looking at the higher level, you can ask it to create a work breakdown structure. So if you're going to start looking at creating timelines and project briefs and looking at allocating of your workforce and what is required, you can ask it from a project point of view to create a work breakdown structure from an IPv6 project point of view. Now, it's probably going to use project management concepts to build that out. And we can see here a simple question I asked it in regards to creating a work breakdown structure. Even gives a little bit of a definition, and it breaks it down into dot points for you. So that way you can put that into your Microsoft project or your spreadsheet or your planning tool that you've got, and then you can start allocating timelines, resources, and so on. Or break it into milestones. So it's quite a little handy tool to build your scripts, to build your project plan, and to also to prompt you for other resources. And this is where the final part is where you're going to need to do more research. So you could always ask it about, list the top 10 resources for IPv6 and see what you get back. It might be something that you don't know about. So you can use it much like a search engine. Ask it, can you give me links to that? Now, one of the other limitations of the ChatGPT is it's not a live connection to the internet. So it's trained on information that is prior to 2021, and it's not all the information, just some of the public resources. So it's 35 terabytes of information that it's been modeled on. So there is a lot there. You can't ask it to go to a current website. So be aware that websites come and go and they get changed all the time. So some of these URLs may not be as popular. So you could go and ask it to list the top 10 resources. Let's see if it's changed with the upgrade to January 9 version. And looks like it has changed. So it's given me instead of giving me URLs, it's now giving me the topics to look for. Now, once you've got your project plan written, you can also ask it to help you write your presentation. So you can ask it to give you an outline for an IPv6 presentation. And this way you can then start creating a PowerPoint slide to deliver the project plan to your stakeholders. And so it breaks it down into different areas for you. You may even be able to use those as your key points to talk about or directly into the slides. And if you are interested, you can also tell it to give you more information about a certain part of this overview or this outline. So as an example, can you expand on the, and all I said was, can you expand on, and I copied and pasted the topic I'm interested on, and it will break it down into more details for you. So there's quite a lot of information it can help you with. So it's going to be able to help you with designing your project outline. It can help you with prompting you on what you need to research. It can help you with writing code or test your code. Now, if you've already got a project plan, you could paste it in there and ask it to reword it as well. Now, things to be aware of is that ChatGPT was not designed or optimized for this type of task. So it may not be the appropriate tool, and it doesn't always provide accurate information. So you may need to rephrase your questions. And we saw that with that RFC that I talked about. So what I recommend is create an account and test it for yourself, but be aware that information that you type into ChatGPT is not private, it's public domain. So if you have any sensitive information, don't put it into your questions. Use sample code that is not sensitive or has passwords in there, or information that is related specifically to your network. So if you want to get an IPv6 address plan, maybe use the IPv6 documentation address range. So as an example, can you tell me about the IPv6 documentation address range? And it gives me what it is there. And so use that address range when you are looking at maybe designing an IP address scheme for yourself. I hope I haven't gone over time. I think I have by 4 minutes. So thank you for your time. Any questions? While we are on the topic, one thing I should mention is that ISIF Asia has a IPv6 deployment grant, and it's open for applications. So you could use the ChatGPT to apply for this IPv6 deployment grant, and you just need to apply now and send an email and ask the details, what information they need, and then start writing. Any questions?